whenever I have a rock star panel like this with so many amazing guests because it means the room is packed. So I can't wait to introduce these fantastic people onto the stage. So first and foremost, Minister for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, Andris Sutt. Please give him a warm welcome to our stage. As well as the, and I'm remembering my titles here, it's Executive Vice President in charge of Europe for Binance, Martin Bruncko. Thank you, Martin. Please join us. As well as Shefali Roy, who previously with the Maker Foundation, because now it's decentralized, she's not a board member, but she very much knows what MakerDAO is doing, and she is an investor with First Look Capital. Welcome to the stage. Wonderful things. Let's dive in. So we have 40 minutes. This is like it feels like one of those COVID stages where I'm on the other side of the room. It's good to see you. Please do scan our QR code. I don't know. Well, there was a QR code. Hello. When it comes back, in order for us to have some questions, we have a lot to talk about. So I'm happy to take questions if we get there. We might actually address a lot of the things you might want to talk about on the way, anyways. So to kind of get us started, I think it would be great to have a very short introduction from each of you just to provide context as to why we are discussing Web3 and crypto adoption from each of your perspectives. Andris. He told me I could say Andris. Protocol, I would say Minister Sutt, but he said, no, we're good. So
we're all on familiar terms.
Excellent.
But the topic, of course, is completely unfamiliar. So I think it's a big discovery. It's a big journey. If these people who claim Web3 will change the way we interact, the way sort of the old or present social media world, the present internet world will change, then I think we just can't be without this journey. We need to be a participant, and I would very much like to see all the Web3 innovators, proponents, evangelists come to Estonia, do it here. We will try to see how the legal environment and regulatory environment works so that we can actually build something great here. So, because I have no clue how many people back in 2007, when iPhone was invented and first launched, did believe that this is going to change the world. So, probably a small minority. Let's give the Web3 a great chance and see if we can co-create something of an equal significance.
Excellent, thank you. Bruno.
Look, I think this term Web3, if I remember correctly, was invented in 2013, right? So it's almost 9 years ago. And I think the fundamentals are still the same. It's basically blockchain as the next layer of the internet, as the next technology with concepts like decentralization and token-based economics. And also the past many years have shown that the last iteration of internet didn't really work for everyone, right? It was supposed to be for free. You were supposed to get all these goodies for free. But when things are for free, it turned out that the users, the customers, were the product. They were the ones being sold. Their data was being sold, often misused, led to all kinds of excesses. So I think there is a big promise in this kind of a new type of decentralized world where instead of being the products, the customers can actually become co-owners in many cases, co-creators. But we're still in very, very early days. You know, we started to discuss NFTs with the minister, what that means. And I think that's a good example of a technology, which I think is extremely promising. But anybody who will tell you that, this is what NFTs are about and this is the future and why, is probably lying, because I think, we still don't know where this is going to go. But I think most of us have a feeling that something great will come out of it, like it came out of the internet in the mid-90s.
Excellent, thank you. Shefali.
I think NFTs are ridiculous, so I'm just going to put that out there. Background-wise, I used to be at Maker, as Ethan was saying, which is the decentralized platform for DAI. Prior to that, I was at Stripe and TrueLayer and at Apple, and I was at Apple in 2007, Anders, when the iPhone was launched. It was a completely different environment and a completely different idea, and I don't think even people at Apple thought it was going to be what it was going to be in terms of the ubiquitousness of the phone. So I think with Web3 and crypto and NFTs and these sorts of new technologies and this whole thing called the creator economy, I think most of it There's a lot of buzz, and so depending on what you're building and depending on what you know, it could go nasty very quickly. And so I would encourage you all, I don't know what your backgrounds are obviously in this room, but I would encourage you to kind of be really careful about how you're thinking about this and how you're building for it and in what type of environment you are building for it, because it ends very quickly. And if you are a Terra fan, you're like stuffed. So I would be really careful about how you're thinking about it and building it. But for the most part, having been at the sort of origination of DAI and as we were building that out and the decentralization of it, the whole point of that project was the community aspect of governance. And so the reason it kind of stays the way it does is because it was built for community in mind. It was built for the community to govern and self-govern the coin. And it was built such that no one entity could break the other entity. And I don't think we've thought about that really thoroughly when it comes to Web3, when it comes to total decentralization. And NFTs, as I say, I think NFTs are ridiculous. So you have to kind of just think about how you want to build it, but also build it in mind in a way that it's sustainable and it has legs and its longevity is validated.
Well, I love that we dove right in to all of these
Might
good
as well.
things.
Time is money. Time is money.
And so along this idea, I wanted us to actually start with because hashtag Web3, hashtag all the current trends, metaverse, whatever those things might be. Sometimes we aren't all coming from the same place in terms of definitions. So I wanted to maybe also throw out there a couple ideas about what we mean when we say Web3, and we've already kind of gone a little bit in that way, but Tim Berners-Lee, the creator, I guess, of this wonderful thing we have with the internet, calls, Web 1 was really this first thing we had in the 90s where it was information that we were reading. It was the read-only web. And then Web 2 was really the read-write web, where we were able to start publishing our own information. It gave us things like social media. We could have a blog. We could put videos on YouTube. So now we became creators as well in terms of contributing to that content. Web 3 takes us to a really interesting place where the creator side of this potentially becomes deplatformed more and more. But more importantly, this idea that it's the read, write, execute web, where now the internet can think and make its own decisions potentially. We've got machine learning and AI that's capable of doing things. We've got smart contracts on the blockchain, which are ways to trigger things to happen whenever certain things happen in terms of transactions on the blockchain. If you hear people talk about smart contracts, just for information, they are neither smart nor contracts, but that's another discussion we will maybe save for later. But the idea there is that we have all these ways that the internet can work on its own more and more, and that people can do these things in a more decentralized way. So we can be talking about decentralized finance. Decentralized finance is basically everything you could think about in finance, just not with the typical actors you would think of. If you have a bank account, if you're earning, if you have a savings account, if you are loaning money, if you are trading stocks or some kind of a mechanism of owning an asset, if you are funding or crowdfunding in some way, if you have insurance, all these different models we can do in a decentralized way. That's part of what we're seeing as well in this Web3 idea. NFTs, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations that we might speak about, all kinds of different things that we can talk about here in Web3. So it's a big umbrella term, but the idea is this next evolution where we go just from having content pushed to us in Web 1, Web 2, we create the content, but it's still centralized. Web 3 is much more of a decentralized version where the content is able to come from many other places, not just
participative is maybe the word. Participative.
Yeah.
Much more participative type of internet.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts then on this idea of Web3 as the next piece of what we have? Why is that important? Why do we need something beyond what we had with Web 2 in this read-write version of being able to have the creator economy, publish content, build things? Why do we need a next version?
I think for me, and again, in this world, I'm kind of a new kid on the block. I'm not a tech person, but what touches me quite strongly in this Web3 concept is perhaps the notion of ownership. And if you think of a Web 2, I mean, it also brought along a huge wave of consolidation. I mean, you have a handful of big tech companies who basically dominate and control. And I think part of it, and you can, if you go to a finance world, it's a little bit similar feature, but you first had national financial systems, when there was a wave of consolidation, and then, of course, on the way, tons of crisis. So it's not kind of a paved road. But I think a reason why Web3 is at least an attempt to change the world is that people are unhappy with the present. I mean, otherwise, I don't think there would be any reason to do a disruptive change, because by definition, we are not talking about incremental changes in the way as we operate. And it's cool that we actually already disagree. I mean, for me, NFT actually is something what doesn't
Isn't
look...
it just like a glorified JPEG? Like, isn't it?
No, I don't know.
So it's so
I know.
not.
Let me just put that out.
and
Isn't
here
it
we
though?
go.
We were just having a discussion earlier. So
Which
like
moves,
if you take art, for example, the most simple thing, a photo, traditional photograph. You are a professional photographer, and you can have an original, or you have always an original. On a printed world, I mean, you can kind of say that, look, this is a first copy, and this is the original copy. With the NFT, you can do the same thing, just digitally. You can also think of digital register, which proves that somebody has a title on this specific digital item. Is it worth paying for it? €1,000,000? €1? I mean, I think that's a matter of opinion and preference. But I think a digital ownership title is something what...
I know Bruno wants to jump on that one.
Yeah.
So on this NFT stuff, right? I mean, it's like the internet in the 90s. People were telling, "Oh, this is a breakthrough technology." Which, all you could do was just read some texts, right? And okay, where is the future? And I think with NFTs, we're in the same stage now. It's super early, but I think there's one fundamentally exciting idea about NFTs, which is that with that you can make a digital original. Why is it important? Any one of you who has studied economics, in the first class they teach you the fundamental way of making sure an economy can work is property rights. You need to have clearly assigned property rights. You need to know what belongs to whom. Some of us, we grew up in socialist or communist economies where things belong to everyone and no one, and we all know where it went. Now, we've moved from physical to a much more digital world, that digital economy. And the problem we've had until now is that you could make infinite copies of a digital file, which is the centerpiece of the digital economy, without it being clear, like which one is the original, which one owns, which one belongs to whom. Now with NFT, you can actually make original digital files. So I think this is still a very kind of a high-end idea, and we still need to figure out how we can implement this. So far, we've only been able to figure it out that this is something that actually works pretty well for pictures. And in that sense, yeah, NFTs are a little bit ridiculous, maybe. But again, it's like saying that internet is ridiculous because all you can get on internet, in 1994 was a website with information about a couple of universities in the US, and that was pretty much it.
And I think, because I see her smiling about lots of this, I do think that the property rights, the intellectual property side of NFTs are both the promise and the risk, or the problem in many ways. So there's a discussion there. But also more importantly, I think it's very important that we push away from the idea that NFTs are just the ugly art that you've seen on Twitter. That's not what NFTs are.
Yep.
That is a very small example of what this means. Non-fungible tokens, non-fungible just means unique. And what it's going to do is allow us to create access to all kinds of things, so that the badge that you might have for a conference like this provides you with access to digital and physical things, because that ticket that you already have is unique. If it has a number on it and it gives you a seat at a concert, it's already a unique thing. If we can take that and make it a digital thing, well, that digital version can bring you more access to other things. So maybe at that conference or that concert, you get access to a special meet and drink with the people, or you get to you can have a special discount on merchandise. You can download special files, like maybe a special MP3 of the concert or whatever, but it provides you with community access in very interesting ways. I think when we start looking at NFTs as a gateway, as a way to prove that you have the right to have access to something, that gets very interesting. If we just get stuck in the world of curiously looking animals on Twitter, then obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense, especially for the money. But I would love to hear the counterpart to why and what you think.
It's always nice to be contrarian at these things, because then it's entertaining for you. Otherwise, you're just bored. I mean, it's, yeah, okay, sure, okay, good. So what? So you can acquire a digital piece of art, and it's really lovely, and it sits on your phone and it sits on your desktop, and it gives you cachet. Like if you are a holder of a bored ape, well, good for you. I mean, that's wonderful. But what does it actually mean in the real sense of the word? And I say this, and I should say, I used to work at Christie's, the auction house, and I ran global compliance and regulatory affairs for Christie's. So I looked at property rights, we looked at intellectual property, and we had to build all of that in. And we built a digital platform for digital art in 2010. So y'all are here, but y'all are late. And so that's lovely too. But I'm not saying I'm not bearish against it. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying one has to think about, well, what is it actually giving you? And if you're doing it for cachet, wonderful. But if you're doing it for value, arguably the volatility of the acquisition and the volatility of the asset is really not a long-term play. And so what are you doing it for? And at the end of the day, and this is obviously, a lot of it is personal preference, but if I get to buy, a Rothko, far out, that would be kind of lovely, but if I get to buy a Rothko, I don't want to pick up my phone and then give you a digital version of a Rothko. I want to see it on my wall because it's sitting there and it's one of the most joyful things on the planet that you get to do, which is experience great art. I don't want to see it on my phone. I want to see it physically in front of me.
And I think
so it is. So sorry, Ethan. To conclude, I mean, it is absolutely a personal preference. But what are you doing it for? If you're doing it for the cachet, go forth, conquer, wonderful, love it. But if you're doing it for value, the volatility of it is hard, and you have to kind of think about, well, what is it doing it for? And finally, just on your first question about Web3, I was talking to some friends in San Francisco, and someone described it to me as Wikipedia on steroids. And I thought that was a really lovely, interesting way of positioning what Web3 is. And so the opportunity for manipulation and misinformation, and because everybody is a creator and is therefore an authority, becomes really dangerous. And so to the question of, well, how does one, not regulate it, but how does one monitor it? And how does one make sure that there's an accuracy of an authentication of information and data and content is part and parcel of what we have to try and do here as a community.
Well, I would like to maybe go down that regulatory hole a little bit to kind of discuss some of the things, especially given that we have someone from a government administration, but then also the platform perspective with Binance and different things. But just to talk about, there's all kinds of things we can talk about with NFTs and social tokens around the creator economy and what that means. I do have a keynote in the morning just to shill that on the decentralized creator economy around Web3. If you do want more examples of how this can or could work, I give a lot there that we can go into that we don't have the time to talk about here. Things that really, ways that we can do things that are not just about animals on Twitter, but actually how do we token gate all kinds of things, meaning how do we provide access to events and content and other assets because we have a digital asset like an NFT or a social token that we have access to. So to talk about regulatory stuff, what do you think, Andres, what's really the next thing that is holding us back or that is blocking us around the regulatory side of seeing Web3, and since it is crypto powered, seeing adoption in this space, what do you see as the regulatory issue or issues that we need to address?
I think I agree very much on the volatility side and also understanding the risks. And I mean, with every innovation, there will many things go wrong. So the question is about the scale, things going wrong, and then sort of people being aware that if I do this transaction, I'm exposed to these sort of risks. But does it mean we should stop innovating? No. I think that's the whole point. If I look at finance, yes, there have been plenty of financial crises, and there will be many more. I mean, that's by definition. I mean, we will never escape. But helping to innovate, and it's a bit similar to fintech, who has been kind of forcing incumbents in the financial markets to move. For me, Web3 is a bit sort of a similar angle, that if we think of the big tech companies and of frustration of people, but they are a product, like you said, and not the owner. I think this is a legitimate point to make. And so what should we do? What should we regulate now? I think there is a lot of talk about crypto and all the downsides with crypto, including use of it by criminals and others, and these are all legitimate concerns. But we should aim for a sandbox or a framework where people can create for legitimate business. We can't close everything because there are criminals around the corner. We should make it difficult for them to access the marketplace. But we should create an environment where you can actually innovate in the market. I also oftentimes consider myself contrarian in terms of at least you question the present and what is existing. And if somebody has a crazy idea, well, maybe it's worth trying it, but then you need to give some sort of a frame, and there will be regulation from MiCA, but also from my experience in financial world, I mean, regulation has always been behind. Yeah. Regulation has never been able to kind of prevent. Yes, it can mitigate, but you will have a crisis. And here, I think we shouldn't really make equation mark between crypto and Web3. I mean, Web3, in my understanding, and again, I don't claim being an expert, is far broader than crypto. And also, if I give a reference to Estonia, like we have used digital signature since early 2000s, which gives you a bulletproof cryptographic confirmation that this signature was given by that person at this point in time with a digital stamp of time. And I think these things are important to give you this authenticity and claim to the original. So, I mean, we will see regulation coming, and I think part of it is driven with dissatisfaction of a crypto world. And here, I mean, for a full disclosure, I haven't yet understood at least what is the value of crypto assets or cryptocurrencies as a competitor to conventional money. And I think NBA in their Top Shot feature, they actually accept also payment in conventional currency. So maybe we need to look how to merge the two worlds and not sort of exclude the real money. So regulation is coming, but I think it's important not to kill the innovation, but somehow find the right balance there. And innovation is always ahead.
I think it's a couple interesting points there, and I think it's obvious nobody's going to go buy a Starbucks latte for 0.00001 Bitcoin or something. Like we're not going to think in those terms. We have to think in numbers and concepts that we can actually work with. But what I do think is interesting, we're going to have this. I mean, I don't think dollars and euros are going anywhere, especially in the short term. But the idea that we're already tapping our phones in order to pay for everything. What does it matter behind the scenes, the network or the protocol or the asset that is being used to make value move from one side to another? Maybe that will be crypto, maybe that will be fiat, or maybe it will be a mix of things. Wonderful startups like TransferWise and things like that have already redefined how we move crypto around by looking at different ways to do that, moving capital around by looking at different ways to, for example, when I need to send money from France to the US, instead of going by a typical wire transfer. So those kind of things are very interesting that we're already seeing. I think we just merged those. On this idea of, to look at maybe Binance then, on this regulatory side, Binance, we were talking a bit before, obviously as the crypto exchange, you attract a lot of attention, and you are working very hard to be transparent and regulatory compliant in Europe. Lots of interesting developments in France, where we are both at. Maybe you'd like to just talk a bit about how you view regulation and its impact on adoption.
So we actually think smart regulation is very important in this space. It's very important for the development of this space. And let me just say sort of what it means, because there are also some buts. But before we get to the buts, let's start with what we're doing. So we've actually just become a fully regulated entity in France. So we have worked for a very long time and very, very hard to basically get regulated, to be accepted by the regulator. France is not an easy country to be regulated. It's a pretty tough regulator. So, I mean, if we actually got this regulatory approval, it means we got it right. And there's a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of things we had to improve. So we're now fully regulated in France, and we're actually applying for registrations, licenses all across Europe where it's required. Why? Well, because A, we want to be compliant with the law, But B, we actually think this is a good thing because it creates an additional layer of trust for the consumers. If you think about the adoption of crypto, the first users, the pioneers, they didn't mind putting their money into, sometimes even an offshore website, completely unregulated. But if you want to go into a mainstream adoption, you really need to generate a sense of trust. And even very often, even the libertarians prefer to put their money into a business that they know is sort of at least overseen by the government. So it creates a layer of trust that the platform is safe, secure, that the money is safe, and that it's not doing any kind of excesses. So this is why we actually put a lot of effort also on things like anti-money laundering, on counterterrorism financing. We actually just last year hired about 500 people globally just to do compliance. Most of these people are specifically focused on anti-money laundering measures, on onboarding clients, making sure that we don't get on our platform any sanctioned individuals, any risky people, and making sure that the transactions that go through the platform don't involve any kind of money laundering. So now, moving forward, I think the very important point, however, is that particularly for this Web 3.0, because we still don't even know exactly where this is going, it's moving so fast. 2 years ago, year and a half ago, nobody heard of NFTs. Last year, it was all the craze. Now we're still kind of trying to understand where it's going. I think the important part is that typically when regulators step in, they always have good intentions. But if there is a misunderstanding of the technology or the regulation comes too late, and it's already regulating for an iteration from 10 years ago or even a year ago, you create all kinds of negative consequences. And I think one thing we really need to avoid in Europe is to over-regulate to the point where it just becomes unattractive for Web 3.0 businesses to be in Europe, to be based out of Europe, to develop out of Europe, and therefore to move elsewhere. We've already lost the battle for the internet, 1.0 and 2.0 version to the US and to China. We cannot afford, and by we mean Europe, European Union, we cannot afford to lose the battle for the next internet.
So I think that's a great transition then to hear your thoughts on regulation, especially from this lots of points in there that might contrast with the idea of the DAO concept. And another way to view organizations and governance and these different things. But I just want to touch on one quick point before we do make that point, because we love to talk about, all the bad people use crypto. All the bad stuff happens with crypto, whether it's sanctions and trying to go around those, whether it is anything around money laundering. And most of you have traveled either to here or travel around Europe. And if you ever cross a border, especially whenever you leave the EU, there will be a big sign that says if you are carrying more than 10,000 euros on your person or $10,000 in the US, you have to declare it before you cross that line. And if you don't, you lose it. They can just take it because you didn't declare it. And why? Because we already have the perfect tool for money laundering, and that's cash. All of that system runs on cash anyways. So do bad people use crypto for bad things? Obviously, but we already have plenty of other systems that can be leveraged in bad ways as well. So I think that's an important point to bring, because it's one of the first things we criticize about crypto and the blockchain economy. And it's not an argument that holds up terribly well when we look at the rest of the financial world as well. But it is something that needs to be addressed. But all these different points, what are your thoughts, Shefali, on all this?
So I've been in compliance and in regulatory affairs for about 27 years, and Bruno is very polite. Most regulators have no idea what they're doing. Okay? And so I've worked in finance, I've worked in crypto. The art world is completely unregulated. And I should say I've never worked with the Estonian regulators, so they're the exception to the rule, I think. But
they are.
Sorry, Anders. Sorry.
Joking.
Right. But I think the grand scheme of things is most regulators actually are policy people. They're not practitioners. So out of curiosity, how many of you are working or building in crypto in this audience? Okay.
Nice.
How many of you are in financial services? Oh, okay. So you are familiar then with the regulatory requirements of what needs to be done and what has to happen. And the sad part is, because most regulators are not practitioners, they're policy writers, you have to take them along with you. And so you have to invest time, and I think this is what Bruno and his team and his company are doing, which is invest time in building out a compliance and a regulatory team, which unfortunately is painful, but you have to do it, because if you want to go to market and you want to accelerate your development and accelerate your route to market, you have to get regulated. And that's just the way it is. But a lot of the work is actually educating and prepping the regulators because they actually don't know. And I've seen this in finance, I've seen this in crypto. I was asked to join the Maker board because of my regulatory background, and a lot of it was talking to policymakers, educating them about stable coins, rather ironically. But that's what we had to do. And so I think from a regulatory perspective, it is an unnecessary evil that you have to get regulated in financial services, and you have to kind of make sure you have policy and procedures with regards to things like AML and KYC and knowing your client and figuring out how to do money and making sure you can have money licenses and all this sort of stuff. And that's all fine. It doesn't actually prevent people from manipulating a system. That's the best you can do. And so what I love about regulators is they'll go, you have to do a best efforts or risk-based approach, which is basically an out for just do what you want, really. Because you have to do it according to your own policy and your own requirement and your own risk tolerance in your business, because you will never get 100% compliance. You never will. And so, you talk about, Ethan, to your point, money laundering and cash being ubiquitous as a tool for money laundering. Well, no, actually, you can buy a painting, you can buy an NFT, you can buy anything to make dirty money clean. You can actually do it. I was once asked by a Swiss bank to come help them do their compliance because they said, we want to help some clients launder some money. And I said, I think you mean anti-money laundering. And they did, Shefali, you've spent such a long time doing anti-money laundering. And we have some really cool clients and some really interesting ones. And they need to know how to, hide some of their money. So do you want to come and help us on the other side? So when there's a will, there's a way. Like, you can't unthief a thief because you're a policy which says, please don't steal. Like, you can't do that. Right. So you can write as much as you can write, and you can have as many tools and requirements in place. But at the end of the day, it's very much a question of how do you build your product and how do you build your brand, and then what is it trying to do to go to market? Whether it's in Web3 or Web 1 or crypto or non-crypto or whatever it is, you can only build as much as you can build to the satisfaction of your own risk tolerance and your customers. And that's all you can do. Because at some point, you kind of have to go, do I want to build a brand? Do I want to build a product? Do I want to make money? Or do I want to go to jail? Because that's the repercussions of breaching policy or breaching the law, which is correct. That's the way it should be. But you can only do that much, and that's why most regulators have an out which says write policy on a risk-based approach or reasonable efforts or best efforts and all this sort of stuff, which is fine. And I'm sure, Bruno, your compliance officer is like loving this thing. But at the end of the day, it's also a question of where do you place your value and how do you want to get to market and how quickly do you want to get to market in order to kind of make your business fly.
So both faces here lit up with some ideas there. Andres, your thoughts?
I should say, Andres, I've never worked with the Estonian regulator, so I'm sure they're great.
Yeah, I used to be in that part of the world, and it's true. I mean, and the objectives are kind of the opposite, or have been at least. So for a regulator, in their mindset is always tuned. Okay, you need to sort of minimize the risks. The more, the better. And then obviously, I mean, if you take no risks, there is no return, there is no innovation. So you need to find this balance. And it's also true that in most cases, these people are more from a policy side. There is not that much of a revolving door between the industry and the regulator, which I personally think is a good thing to have for as long as it is properly governed, because people need to be on both sides of the table. Then we get the better outcome. But I think this sort of lack of understanding goes equally to the market side. If I just recall back 2005-06 when I was in Vienna, there was a pretty big event with senior banking officials, insurers, so on and so forth. And then there was big debate, we should invest more in CDOs, CLOs, and if you can add even bespoke would be even cooler. So, and then to my great surprise, when I talked to these people, they said, we actually don't really understand the product, but we were told that this is a good stuff, we slice and dice and all the risks are somehow disappearing. So I think this sort of, you go with a wave anyway. So, but I think the point here being, and that actually was maybe biggest surprise for me when we had an NFT event here in Tallinn, but the industry asks for regulation. I haven't never heard this before. I was sort of that's the last thing I expect you to say. But I think there is actually somebody mentioned building the trust.
Yeah.
I mean, this is clearly an important feature that you need to give with all this new stuff, confidence for people that I mean, in most cases, you don't burn your fingers and you're not going to be cheated, and it's not a Ponzi scheme, which there is also a perspective. But as I said, regulation is always following. I mean, it will never be able to kind of foresee what is coming, and then it overreacts when a crisis comes.
So on this thing, like, asking for regulation. So, let me tell you, Anders, maybe why actually we're asking for regulation, right? In one of my previous lives, I used to run a flying car business. So we're building a flying car. And basically, we were actually saying that we really need to build a product to existing regulation. Because why is regulation important? Is because you need to know what you can do and what you cannot do. Because you never want to be in a gray zone where you don't really know, like, is this really allowed or not, right? So when we were building a flying car, we said, like, let's not build the most futuristic model because we can never certify it, and then you cannot use it. Let's build it according to existing legislation. Going to Binance. This is why actually very early on we went to Malta, and then we ended up in France, because Malta was the first country in Europe that actually, paradoxically, set the rules for crypto. And then France was one of the first ones that came after. And this is really important. Again, not being in a gray zone, knowing what you can do. Point one. Point two, we really want to work with regulators. We want to work with governments. We need to build trust with you guys, obviously. But this is really, really important, because I think that's the only way how to, again, avoid kind of unintended regulatory consequences, because bad regulation is much worse than no regulation, for sure. And I think we also need to show to you, at least those of us who really, I mean, at Binance, we really have values where we do not want crime to take place on the platform. Russia sanctions, right? On Russia sanctions, where Russia sanctions were implemented, the first question was, how many people have you offboarded, from this list? And the answer was only a couple. Like, really, why? Well, guys, because you're kind of behind. We've already offboarded them way back. Actually, we never let them on the platform because we have very strong KYC, and we've already identified them as PEP risk, as corruption risk. So they were never offboarded. Another example, the daughter of Dmitry Peskov, she was put on a sanctions list. Dmitry Peskov is the spokesperson of Kremlin, I guess, in Estonia. You probably know the name, unfortunately, well. She was offboarded 3 weeks before you guys, quote unquote, before the EU put her on the sanctions, because we have proactive approach, because we were able to identify her as actually a potential sanctions evasion risk. So, but it's up to us to communicate with the regulators, with the government as well, so that the governments realize that we're not just the bad guys, or we're not hiding, we're not just doing whatever is good for business, and that bad things are good for our business. Again, bad things are not good for our business. We're in here for long-term, long game. We really want to drive the crypto adoption. We believe this is a fundamentally good technology. And if there are excesses that take place, visible crimes that take place, it's completely going to destroy the credibility of this industry. And that's why it's also in our interest to make sure this doesn't happen.
So last quick thought, Shefali, as we wrap up our time together.
No, I agree. I think Bruno's absolutely right. I would say, though, that the whole of Malta is a gray area. So, if you're going there for regulation, good luck. But, and kudos to you guys for doing it in France, because France is painful. So the interesting thing about regulatory bodies across Europe is actually all of them rate and rank each other. And so if you go to France, it's a massively great thing. But if you go to Malta, it's like, what the hell is going on here? Because all of the regulators actually scrutinize each other. And so, again, as you're thinking about where you'll want to get regulated or where you'll want to bring your business, it does matter from a regulatory point of view. My final thoughts, Ethan, I would just say, look, I think be practical and be really commonsensical about what you're building and how you're building it. And from a regulatory perspective, the best way I've always found is to take the regulator with you. So make sure you build a relationship with them. Make sure as you're building your product and you're building your company out, that you actually just work with them and meet them before you need to get regulated, so that when you do get regulated and say, look, here's my license application, you're not a stranger, they know you and you're familiar with them, but also you've built this relationship in educating them and vice versa, in the product, in the environment, in the community, in the actual mechanics of how this function works, such that when you want to get regulated, it should not be this novel thing. They'll understand and they'll be with you. And it is laborious and it is painful, but that's actually how you win. And that's how you beat all your competitors, by having really strong, smart business people take the regulator along for the ride. And in the end, it actually pays off. So then you become like the buy finances of the world. You become the market leader and you actually become the dominant player, such that, although I know these are words that I shouldn't be saying, dominant player, but you become actually the leader in the market, such that everybody else then has to follow you. But the best way to do it is to invest time early on, take the regulator with you, and then be the market leader.
Well, thank you for all these great thoughts. We've got some other good Web3 stuff this afternoon as well. And like I mentioned, if you're interested in this decentralized creator economy idea with the NFTs and social tokens and all those fun things, I have a keynote dedicated to that in the morning. That would be fun for you to, if you want to check that out. If you are wanting to play with this and you don't, because I only saw a few hands with the crypto stuff, I launched the Ethan coin, which is a social token on Rally. I'm happy to give some of that to everybody in the audience, and an NFT that is it's called a POAP, a proof of attendance. You just go on my Twitter. There's a link. You can go there, sign up for the account, and get it for free. Come to the keynote in the morning. That would be great. These amazing people will be around. I know you have to run, but if you have other questions that we did not, I got to some of your questions in the list, but others, feel free to reach out to them during the day and chat with them as well. Thank you for your time, your attention, and give a round of applause to these amazing rock star panelists that we had.